Welcome to the Sell My Business podcast. I'm your host, Jeffrey Feldberg. Are you thinking about an exit or liquidity event? This podcast is designed to help you increase the value of your business and at the same time, give you the certainty to capture the maximum value in your liquidity event. At the heart of the Deep Wealth experience is the 9-step roadmap of preparation. Learn and master the same strategies that had me say no to a 7-figure offer and a short time later say yes to a 9-figure offer. In the words of a business owner who went through the system, the Deep Wealth experience was hands down the best program I've ever participated in. To learn more about the 90-day Deep Wealth experience, please visit www.deepwealth.com/success. Welcome to episode 70 of the Sell My Business podcast. Dr. Ivan Zakharenkov is a veterinarian, an entrepreneur, and a passionate advocate for the well-being of veterinary professionals. 12 years as an ER vet inspired Ivan to create SmartFlow, a first-in-the-industry workflow optimization system later acquired by Fortune 500 company IDEXX. In 2019, Ivan founded Veterinary Integration Solutions, an executive consulting firm where he helped veterinary groups systematize acquisition, integration, and improvement of practices with special attention to burnout prevention. Along the way, Ivan obtained an MBA degree in international healthcare management with a thesis in implementation of lean thinking to improve the employee experience. Pursuing his goal to make a sizable impact on the veterinary profession, Dr. Zach took the lead in Galaxy Vets, a new veterinary healthcare system co-owned by its employees with burnout prevention as a strategic priority. Ivan, welcome to the Sell My Business podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. And for our listeners, hang on to your hats. You're in for a real treat today because Ivan is going to help us decode the world of a buyer. He has extensive experience in this. We're going to hear the ins and outs of what your future buyer is hoping that you're going to do and is looking for, and how to really maximize your liquidity event and make sure that it's the absolute best for you. But one thing at a time, Ivan, I would love to hear the story behind the story. How did you get to where you are today?
Hi, Jeffrey. Thanks for having me. It's quite a glorious introduction. I'll try to justify it maybe. So my background, I'm originally from Ukraine, came to Canada about 20 years ago. I have a background as a veterinarian, which I got my veterinary degree in Atlantic Vet College in PEI, Canada. The first sort of serious step into running a business was right after vet school. I had an unusual experience. Instead of going to work as a veterinarian straight after school, I went to Russia to learn how to do surgery. And while I was doing that for 3 weeks as an international experience, I realized that they don't have a diagnostic lab for pets in Moscow. So I came back. I had a job lined up in British Columbia, wanted to learn more about diagnostic imaging, advance my veterinary career, and then just mentioned to someone that there's no diagnostic lab in Moscow. And someone said, "Do you want to build one?" And so I said, "Why not?" And I went to Russia and built the first veterinary lab in Russian Federation. That was an interesting experience. And then I came back to Canada and continued with my veterinary career. So I worked as an emergency vet for about 12 years and was exposed to many hospitals. I worked as a relief veterinarian in emergency. And I noticed certain inefficiencies in the workflow. They were really annoying to me. So I came up with an idea to optimize workflow and partnered up with a high school classmate of mine with whom we decided to build a software application. And we ended up building a software product that was optimizing workflow in the veterinary clinics, and starting from the garage, or if you will, the little bachelor apartment in Toronto, it grew to be a software that we distributed to 600 hospitals globally: Australia, New Zealand, Africa, Europe, US, Canada. And in 2018, we ended up selling this to a Fortune 500 company called IDEXX. They're in Portland, Maine. This is the biggest diagnostic company, I think, in the world in the veterinary domain. And I ended up becoming a general manager of their software division. I stayed in the veterinary domain, but I shifted to completely to do software. And along the way, I realized some deficiencies in my business background. We don't get much of that while in vet school. And I ended up doing an MBA with a focus on business methodologies in the healthcare industry. So my specialty was in healthcare management. And a year later, I came out of that company, couldn't do the corporate, and decided to build a new initiative which focuses on helping consolidators or roll-ups, as they call them, to acquire veterinary hospitals while preserving the experience of the seller. So basically focusing on the veterinarians, but building the large enterprise that merges anywhere from 20 to 50 to a couple hundred hospitals. And that's what I'm pretty much busy day to day these days.
Wow, Ivan, that's an amazing story. I can't help myself. I mean, after all, this is the Sell My Business podcast. Let me just quickly ask you, for your exit, for your liquidity event, firstly, congratulations on that. Good for you. When you look back to that, Ivan, if you could go back to the younger Ivan who's going through that liquidity event, on the positive side, what worked really well for you? What would be a few things that you would even do more of in terms of strategies or approaches or tactics on your liquidity event?
I learned at some point about, I don't know if you heard of the Montessori kids education. This is a very early school when kids are learning by doing. And I compare my MBA degree with that, doubling up on hours and working, I think, 26 hours a day plus studying was probably the best choice because everything I learned in the MBA course, I applied immediately to the business. We didn't have a product that resonated with the market just because it was, I don't know, maybe it was luck, maybe we just had a domain expertise, but the business aspect of it was difficult. When it came down to selling the company, we had a dinner with the CEO of the acquirer, of the buyer, and I know the figure that they had in mind for acquisition. And after the conversation and everything that we had from business structure, I know that number went up by 40% approximately. Wow. Just from one conversation, because what I was able to apply from business school directly to my business. So I think that the best part that I can think of is jumping in and learning something while you're doing the business. Even though it feels like crazy, I think that's probably the best advice I could give to anybody. And I'm doing that again. I'm doing another leadership course at Stanford right now as I'm building this new software company.
Congratulations. That is terrific. I just love how you were able to increase 40% from the start of the conversation to the end of the conversation with your future buyer. And so, Ivan, let me look back and ask this question in regards to your liquidity event. Nothing's ever perfect. Things always happen. Were there a few things that you would do differently, knowing what you know today, that you would pass along and share to our community of a heads up of what to look out for in a liquidity event?
I think that it's important to understand the actual synergies that the company is looking for post-acquisition. Because if those are not aligned with your vision, for the founders, of course, it's a great event. It's becoming wealthy. It's executing on some sort of projects, dreams, and things like that. But then if you're planning to stay in the business and continue working with the business within the structure of the new organization, you need to really understand that the synergies that they're expecting post-acquisition and the incentives are aligned with the plan. Because McKinsey claims that up to 75% of acquisitions fail. They're looking probably at the numbers right after acquisition, but it's probably not that percentage. But there's a lot of synergies that are not executed. So aligning the synergies prior acquisition and incorporating into integration plan, I think is very important.
And what's interesting, and for our listeners, I hope you're paying close attention, because Ivan, what you've done, not just in this one instance, but as you're sharing your story, this is what we would call step 2 in the Deep Wealth Experience, a 9-step roadmap, X factors to insanely increase your enterprise value. You were doing it selfishly for yourself, which later turned out to be the best thing. You found, as you said, inefficiencies. You found problems. In other words, you found a problem. It drove you nuts. And you said, hey, I'm going to be the one to solve it. It's going to help me. It'll make my life better. But that problem that you solved each time turned out to be a huge win for your business, for the marketplace, for your future buyer. So your ability to find a problem, solve it, what we at Deep Wealth call it's a blue ocean. You created a blue ocean for yourself. You're unique in doing that. Worked really well for you. And then you got on the radar and were able to do some wonderful things in terms of monetizing that solution and that blue ocean. So congratulations. What's interesting, Ivan, is where you sit right now today with your experience, both on the software side and the private equity side of all these different roll-ups. What are some of the things when you're analyzing a business that a business owner, if they did this, it would work to their advantage? It would just make their value increase. It would make the deal easier. What would be a few things that come to mind for that?
I think it's exactly the same thing as on the seller side. What are the theses of the buyer? What are they trying to execute on? The buyer usually acquires businesses to increase the shareholder value. So when this acquisition happens, it's not to make the seller wealthy. It's not their goal. So they're looking for some sort of, again, synergies post-acquisition to execute on them. Owner of the business, if you're selling it, I think understanding what is going to be the performance that they're looking for, whether it's locked into the seller or into the business, especially if there's holdbacks and things like that in the deal, that you have hit certain KPIs and certain numbers, you really need to understand how do you reach those and how do you get to those achievements that are outlined in the deal itself.
You said a couple of things, and one is finding the synergy for the buyer in terms of what you're doing. And then you also said to know what the thesis of the buyer is. So if I'm a business owner and I'm now going down the path of a liquidity event, and at Deep Wealth, we always recommend, and this may drive you nuts as a buyer, Ivan, but we always recommend an auction where you can have multiple buyers at the table. Maybe it doesn't work out for one particular buyer. You have another group of buyers that you can go to. It also helps with the enterprise value. But what can I do as a business owner, Ivan, to find out your thesis, to make sure that the meeting is a terrific use of your time and give you a comfort level and help me create a narrative that resonates with you?
Well, hopefully the buyer outlines those prior to the meeting, or at least if you can find them from what the company does. We probably are covering here multiple verticals with the audience, but in our specific vertical, when the acquirer or the roll-up of the veterinary practices says, post-acquisition, we want to make your life easy and we want to take care of the back office. So we want to do marketing for you, inventory management, and we want to help you with talent acquisition. And then we're creating a joint venture by keeping you with some interest. That's the partnership model that they have. So understanding the most common partnership models that you walk into, and as a seller, understanding, do you want a full liquidity event? Do you want partial liquidity event? Do you want to retire? Do you want to work for another 10 years? So sometimes the acquirer doesn't have to buy 100% of the business. Let's say they're buying 60 or 70 or 80%. Then you want to prepare for these scenarios and know what those partnership models are. And then understanding what is the times for their money and how long they're going to spend on buying these businesses. In a roll-up world, it's a short sort of 3 to 5 window for private equity, unless you're selling to a large fund. And knowing that, you need to be prepared that if your plan is to work for the next 10 years and the private equity that's funding this business in 5 years wants to sell, then regardless of what they're telling you right now, that's going to change in 5 years or 3 years. So you need to understand that there's going to be that change. You need to be able to maintain what you signed up for in order to create your wealth and in order to execute on your retirement planning. Because usually if you're selling a part of the business, you need to understand what's going to happen with the equity that you roll into the business, or how is it going to multiply. So there's all these details about how are you planning to increase the value of your asset if you're selling it fully or partially.
And so it's interesting then, when you're looking at, in this case, a veterinary clinic, as an example, how does a business that's independent or a business that depends on the founder, what does that look like for you, and how does that change a potential deal?
So as an acquirer, it's very important because, again, depending on how you're buying the business, if you're looking at the business where there was one provider, let's say it's a veterinary clinic and there's one veterinarian, or there's two, but one is really driving that revenue and what we call them sort of unicorns, then if that's the person who is getting liquidity event, you need to assume that person is going to be probably less motivated after the liquidity event. So you need to account for that, or you need to lock the incentives in the way that the seller is still interested in high performance and production post acquisition. So you need to make sure that your KPIs that you put on the practice as well as onto the entire network helps them to execute on what you've put in that agreement. And I think that a lot of veterinarians don't understand that. Talking about what KPIs the buyer is measuring their organization on is important. And some organizations, especially in veterinary domain, that's why our business exists right now. We help them to build those KPIs because a lot of them measure just the finance. And even if it's just the finance, what do they measure? How do they measure success? Because if your strength is in not what they think is strength of their organization, maybe that's not a match. So you need to understand that if your strength matches what they value, then there's a match.
And Ivan, for our listeners who are hearing the word KPI and maybe they don't know that means a key performance indicator, what would be an example of a few key performance indicators that you're looking for in a veterinary clinic? And for our listeners, you're not running a veterinary clinic. Listen anyways, because you can take from here and you can apply it to your business. And if you are running a veterinary clinic, bonus, here's a great insight into what you should be doing. What would be some of the main KPIs, Ivan, that you look for and why that's important to you as a potential acquirer?
I think some of these would be universal across multiple business verticals. What's interesting is when you're measuring productivity of the clinic or business, it is potentially different from what you're measuring as the contributor within the clinic. And I'm going to parse that a little bit. If I'm a clinic, what is important to me is EBITDA, my earnings before taxes, depreciation, and amortization. That is how the business is valued usually for sale, at least in the veterinary vertical. And the multiple is based on that. And in order to arrive to that number, you need all of your revenues and you need all your expenses. And then you understand what your profit is. And then you arrive to the EBITDA. And that's the multiple that you will have. But if you have people in the organization, like associates that are not owners, they're driving the sales part of things. They're driving the revenue. And the most common KPIs in veterinary domain that people measure is average check transaction. So how much money you bring per check on average. And what I see a lot, and this is what we deal with all the time, is that veterinarians don't understand conversation. When you talk to them, your average check transaction is low. Because when you deal with healthcare, if I have a coughing patient coming in, or I have a patient that's coming in hit by a car, it's vastly different health scenario. And I can't lift the average between the two. It's basically what you're presented with, you do your best to treat the patient. And I think that's the main disconnect in our domain is because veterinarians perceive their success based on the health outcomes. And then business looks at it as the numbers produced. So what is important is that KPIs are presented to the people that generate revenue in the way that they understand it. So common KPIs, average check transaction. If you're looking at the business, your COGS, so cost of goods sold, should be at a certain percentage. In veterinary domain, it's around 20%. And if it's too high, you need to shrink your inventory. So there's a lot of instruments that you can apply, but basically you need to widen the gap between the top line and the expenses. And then that's your EBITDA that you will get the multiple on. But then again, if you get to the level of the producer, you need to only think about what services they provide and maybe set goals for them to push on the services that bring most of the profits.
What's really interesting when you start looking at key performance indicators, and whether you're running and you own a veterinarian clinic or you're in a manufacturing business or you have a high-tech company, I would say most business owners aren't measuring enough and they just don't have KPIs. So it's the old adage of what gets measured is what gets done. And for all you business owners out there, when you put metrics in place, now you have a measuring stick. How did we do today? How did we do this week, this quarter, this month? How do we do now versus this time last year? And you start to see patterns and trends. And Ivan, to your point, if the average total amount charged per sale is going down, well, why? What's happening? Or if it's going up, what are we doing that's going up? How do we do more of that? How do we do less of that? And so I think it's just a terrific way of really optimizing your business, particularly if you're going to have a liquidity event. That's terrific. But at the same time, you want to have a thriving business either way. As I like to say, what's wrong with having a thriving and profitable business that you can keep forever, or you can sell it tomorrow? Both choices are terrific. Put yourself in a situation where you can do both. And so, Ivan, what I also heard you say, and maybe we can do a little bit of a deep dive on this. When private equity is looking to go in and, let's say, do an outright purchase on a veterinarian clinic, if it's a one-person shop, as opposed to a veterinary clinic that has multiple vets that are there, it's not dependent on the founder. If the founder took a year vacation, it wouldn't make a difference. I would imagine that your valuation is going to be very different between the two scenarios. Can you talk to us about the thinking that goes behind that and what the thought process and the strategy is at that point?
It's certainly mitigating risk. I think when private equity invests capital into such a thing as roll-up, they already ran their risk profile. And then within that portfolio, they know that there will be certain practices acquired. But then the executive team that runs consolidation, they need to really understand that risk profile of the private equity that they are funded by. The risk of losing a unicorn producer that is the only producer, that's just tanking the business. The risk of having someone take time and vacation, I think, is not that big, just like you outlined. I think it's a matter of really understanding what type of risk you're willing to take. The valuation in our vertical, it's hard to say to a veterinarian that is a high producer, the practice is profitable, and then say, but you're going to get less multiple because you're just one guy. Today, the market is so frothy in the veterinary domain that I think it's basically just a comfort level of the organization, how much risk they want to take on, but they wouldn't change the valuation much. In other verticals, I can see how that could play a role in the multiples.
And if the valuation isn't changing, you had referenced earlier, is this where you might have the dreaded earnout or perhaps a higher escrow or other kinds of mechanisms to account for that risk factor?
Exactly. So you would incorporate into a deal, which is one way you can look at it and say the dreaded earnout. The other way to look at it, glass half full person, then yay, there's a mechanism how I can sell the practice where I'm one practitioner. I just have an earnout. So, that's maybe another way to look at it and to say, yes, there are mechanisms. Don't accept lower valuation. Be creative with how do you structure the deal so you can still capitalize on the full value of your business.
I think we could have a whole separate podcast on an earnout, but the big takeaway here, and this is not just for veterinary clinics, and I love your term, the unicorn producer. Hey, business owners out there, if you are the unicorn in your business, you have a problem. You have a big problem. Go and build out a management team. Let your management team be your unicorn in the business. It frees you up. It gives you more options. And I would say it can even give you a higher valuation when your business runs without you. And talk to us about that, Ivan. So when you're walking into a veterinary clinic and there's just a strong management team, they've been in the seat for a number of years, they have a proven track record, does that change your thinking at all in terms of doing the deal, not doing the deal, or even not make a difference at all?
The veterinary businesses, unfortunately, are rarely, at least the smaller practices, are rarely well structured on the management side of things. If you're talking 1-2 operators, the veterinarians, then they would have the customer support people, they will have our customer success front desk, they would have some technicians or nurses, and they would maybe have a practice manager. If you're talking about bigger practices, multi-specialty hospitals, they usually have an infrastructure, and it's more comfort acquiring those because other than sourcing specialists, it's a business where there's people, well, if they're leaving, they could be replaced. It's not, again, hanging on one person. So in veterinary domain, unfortunately, the smaller businesses usually don't have that management structure. But if you have one, it's more comforting. But again, the challenge in the veterinary domain right now is that we have too many pets and not enough vets. And that's what we're facing every day, which to me, I've recently changed sort of the way I talk about acquisitions in veterinary domain. And this is our head of sales at Veterinary Integration Solutions. He said, look, I'm looking at the acquisition of veterinary businesses not anymore as you're buying an asset or a business, it's an acqui-hire. because we don't have enough professionals to drive revenue. So you're buying the practice with people in it. So the focus should be on preserving those people experience, and then focusing on that is more important than actually the business itself.
I'd love to circle back and talk about the market conditions. Before we do that, though, Ivan, I would love to get your input on this. And here's the question for you. When you're going through the due diligence for a business, or when the private equity is doing the due diligence on the business, I would imagine that on the downside, on the negative side, there are just certain things that are happening that just aren't good for the deal. It either takes longer to happen, or you have to put more provisions in place to protect the acquisition or the infusion of capital. What are some of the common mistakes that you're seeing out there that you can share with our community of things not to do?
So what we see a lot is that veterinarians don't want to upgrade their systems. They don't want to buy new equipment. They're saying, I'm selling the business anyway. I don't want to invest into it. When the private equity evaluates the veterinary hospital for sale, they need to account for all the capital expenses that they'll have to infuse post-acquisition into the business to develop it, not being all caught up on all the vacation pay, the pension funds, and everything else that sort of those soft things that people didn't demand for a long time. And then they accumulated a bunch of vacations. All of that will go into the negative side of the valuation of the deal. So those things should be maintained. And I think it's a good practice to hire either a coach or financial people, what you do, Jeffrey, to help you to shape the business towards that event, to watch for these sort of pitfalls. You were building your business for 10, 20 years, and this is your asset for retirement. And then all of a sudden, we've seen it many times when veterinarians think, oh, I'm going to get this and that amount. And then when you do the finances for the last 3 years, you understand that your business is not worth as much as you thought if you did certain things right for the last 3 to 5 years before you sell.
You can pay me now or you can pay me later, but you're going to pay. And business owners in general don't hold back on keeping your infrastructure up to date and making sure that you're current, because either one or two things is going to happen for your liquidity event. If you've put the money in, you've invested it, you'll spend less money doing it your way. You'll negotiate a better deal than a private equity group. We just got to get it done. Let's just go. So you're actually saving yourself time, money, and effort down the road. You removed a skeleton, as we like to say at Deep Wealth, one of those skeletons in the closet. You found it, you removed it. And Ivan, I think that's terrific advice of keep current with the business. Don't hold back, don't scrimp. It's better for you. It's better for your future acquirer. It's just a good news story for everyone all around. Are there any catastrophic mistakes that you see businesses make that have you say, we knew there might be a few hiccups along the way, but wow, this is just so off the range here. We're just not even going to do it.
I've seen worse. I've seen the deal happen and then was returned. One of the biggest challenges I've seen is too many skeletons in the closet. Having gone through due diligence myself, as much as it's unpleasant process, I wish I had it done up front and more things that I didn't have to tie the loose ends during the process. Because every time you dig up something that you forgot about for a year, 2, or something else, then you have to fix it in a very short period of time because you signed some sort of a letter of intent that you have to close up the deal. And then when things are discovered during the due diligence that you have to fix very quickly, the buyer has an opportunity to renegotiate the deal. Every time you find something that may decrease the value of your business or risk the investment that they're doing, then they probably will leverage that to lower the valuation. So fixing everything up front, and then also the culture. And that's what I've seen a couple of times in the veterinary domain. They were acquired, and then it turns out that the things are not just not okay in there, but there's some relationships going on. There was a husband and wife, and then the wife was cheating on husband with someone in the hospital. Like the culture that they bought into was it just fell apart as soon as they bought it, and people were just not happy working there. So it's one of the hardest things to do, and most often ignored thing is the cultural diligence. But I think that doing the due diligence on the culture of acquired business is very important. And if you don't get it right and you buy a business where just everybody unhappy to begin with and they're burned out, which is very common in our domain, then you're in trouble because you'll have to hire new people immediately out of the gate. You just bought a group of people that don't want to work together.
Words to the wise. And what you're saying, Ivan, really resonates with us in the Deep Wealth community. Good preparation does two things. Number one, it helps you find and remove the skeletons in the closet. And then number two, every business is world class in at least one area. Usually it's more. And we call those areas that you're world class, and those are the hidden Rembrandts in the attic where you can identify what you're world class in. So you find your Rembrandt and now you put it out for public display. From your perspective as a future acquirer, if you're walking into a business, they've already performed an internal due diligence audit on themselves. They remove the skeletons. They're letting you know what those Rembrandts are. When you see that kind of preparation, they have their own data room. Everything's already been done. It gives you a level of confidence, not only to do the deal, but perhaps to revisit the enterprise value in a good way of, okay, I know we were thinking about this, but look at all these new things that we learned. Perhaps the business is worth more. I would love your take on that.
Going back to my experience with our company acquisition, I think that's what happened. We were able to display things that we prepared in the last couple of years and restructured our management. We had layers of management. We had KPIs going up and down the organization, balanced scorecard. We had a very well-structured org chart. And I think that that's what helped us to increase the value of the company. In veterinary business, it's doing things in advance, like appraisal of your real estate, because usually the businesses are sold with or without the property, and things like a general preparation. I certainly experienced through our exit that those things can change your valuation overnight, which is literally what happened with us.
Which is terrific. And then when you have that, I'll call it a culture of preparation. And this ties back to your comments earlier, Ivan, on culture. I like to say that money can buy lots of things, but it cannot buy culture. Your competition can use its capital to copy your technology, to copy your marketing, copy everything, but they can't copy your culture. And when you're having a liquidity event, a rich culture really stands out, makes you different. Would you feel that a healthy culture with KPIs that are part of it and measuring those metrics and looking for those blue oceans and growing, how does that affect you as a buyer?
It's interesting. I changed my view on the culture a little bit recently. I took a M&A course at Harvard. They were talking about, a lot of times people think about the culture as just core values, mission, vision, and things like that, which are extremely important. And you need to understand if they align, because one of the 6 triggers of burnout is misalignment on core values. But the way they defined at Harvard, the culture is also, how do you get things done here? What are the processes? And I thought that those were not the culture piece, but how do you get things done here? And does it align with the way we do things? What is normal? What is abnormal? What would surprise you if someone did it this certain way? And then you would say that doesn't fit our culture, how we handle things here. So I think that that's important angle of this. It's not just the mission, vision, and core values. I think it's the, how are the processes handled? Is there continuous improvement culture? Do people try to improve every process they make, or they're just handling everything with status quo because this is how we've done it for the last 20 years? Those are hard things to pick up during due diligence. And that's why you really want to spend time not only with the seller, do they communicate it with their management team? Because what happens a lot in veterinary domain, a lot of veterinary owners will come in and say, hello team, I just sold my business with all of you in it on the day. So there's no preparation. All the shock happens after they already announced the deal and it already happened. So all of those things are very important to pick up in advance and understand how they run things.
Well, Ivan, let me ask you, because you bring up the one area I know most business owners, and I struggled with this with my exit. When and how do you tell the staff, hey, we're going to be having a liquidity event, or we've had a liquidity event? How do you deal with that? What's your advice?
It's a very interesting aspect. We've been asking many consolidators in our domain how they do this. And I think that the most successful ones, they learn that they have to actually demand the seller to make an announcement a couple months prior to liquidity event. And I thought that was extremely smart, because usually the shock that happens to the team, it happens once they find out. And then people are nervous. They think they're going to lose their job. They think that the corporate will come in and slash a bunch of positions, and those positions that are there are going to start doing 3 times more work. So there's a tremendous stress. You can use this stress to guide the change, because if this is an organization where there was no change in the past, and if you want to do change management properly, if you make an announcement early enough, drive the positive effects of the acquisition and the added culture from a new business that owns this business. And while people are in that turbulence, push the change alongside because they already are in turbulence. So you can actually manipulate that state of instability, if you will, to implement change correctly.
But I know the one pushback that's often there is, well, liquidity events are very fickle and maybe it doesn't happen. And now you've created unnecessary concern amongst the employees or with your clients. So where is that right balance between no information and too much information?
I'm sure it's very different for every business, but when someone who is thinking to sell the business signs the letter of intent, I think the person or the group of owners are pretty certain that this will happen. It might not happen with this particular buyer, but they made a decision. You don't sign the LOI if you're not on the journey to sell your business. If we were to put some sort of a template on the situation, I think if you're at the point where you're just shopping, that's fine. But if you're at the point where you're putting letter of intent in place, maybe at that point informing the team and getting the temperature, understanding people that are most vulnerable, your team that is relying on this job maybe the most for other than just pay reasons. We just acquired actually a smaller company. And in order to implement the change, I personally went and talked to every person in their company. It was a small company, small software company. So I was able to talk to the 10 people on their team, but I met with everybody, I understood their needs, so they feel welcome in our company. So I think that introducing people and doing all of that stuff, at least on the cultural level prior to actual acquisition, will really help to smooth the transitional period and will keep the respect of your team to you, especially if you're staying in the business. That's very important.
Some terrific advice and wonderful insights on that. Ivan, let me ask you something. In the current pandemic that we're going through and lights at the end of the tunnel, I would imagine that the pandemic in the veterinary industry, has it been a pandemic that's been an accelerator for this frothy market to have these roll-ups because everyone's been getting pets from the pandemic and it's put a surge on the veterinary clinics? Is that one of the unexpected market conditions that came around as a result of the pandemic, or has it been something else that's been driving the growth?
There's a couple events and couple conditions that COVID brought that helped the industry to accelerate. We have a joke going in the industry that veterinary medicine is immune to COVID virus because it was only March of 2020 and April that the general revenues dropped. And then starting May, June, it restored and then went 78% year over year prior to the previous one. A couple of reasons for that. One is, as you said, people are adopting more pets because they're now at home and they want to spend time with the companion. The second reason is those that do have pets or new pets at home, now they're not going to work and they're observing more clinical signs. So if their dog was limping, coughing, vomiting, whatever it is, while they're not at home, they don't see the clinical signs to concern them to bring the pet to the hospital. So that increased demand. And then in addition to that, more business owners that were considering selling later, now with the next wave, especially in Europe, I know that in England with the latest lockdown, a bunch of veterinarians just threw the towel and said, look, I don't want to do this anymore because we were the essential business, so we stayed operating, but the workflows had to be extracted to servicing the customers in the parking lot, which they call curbside service, and other things that are just driving people to burnout. So that's an additional activity that added to M&A. So yeah, those are the factors.
And again, what's interesting about this, Ivan, is no one could have predicted the pandemic. But it goes back to if you're prepared as a business. So if you're a veterinary clinic, as one example, you followed our 9-step roadmap, or you just prepared. You prepared your business year in, year out. An opportunity now arises. You're ahead of a curve. It's a different curve that we're talking about here, but you're now ahead of the curve and you can take advantage of that now while everyone is still trying to catch up. And for the community out there, to me, the big takeaway is when you're prepared, you cannot time the market, but you can time when you do go to market. So if it's a frothy market right now and it's very strong and you're ready, well, you're the benefactor of that. If it takes you a year to get ready or 2 years to get ready, maybe the market is there, maybe it's increased, but maybe it hasn't. You have that uncertainty that's now come in there. So to me, that preparation is at the heart of everything, of really running, owning a successful business. Prepare and be smart. So Ivan, as we begin to wrap up the interview, There's one question that's my favorite question, and I love to ask every guest on the Sell My Business podcast. And the question is this: I'd like you to think about the movie Back to the Future. And in the movie, you had the magical car, the DeLorean car that would go to any point in time. And so, Ivan, I want you to imagine tomorrow morning, you wake up, you look out your window, and the DeLorean car, it's right outside your door. The door is open. It's welcoming you in. You hop in the car and you can go to any point in time. Maybe it's Ivan as the young child or a teenager, adult, whatever point in time it would be. What would you be telling yourself in terms of lessons learned or life wisdom or do this or don't do that?
I wish I maybe listened to more of your episodes to hear the examples, and I might be a disappointing one here. But more recently, through everything that happened, I really liked the speech that Steve Jobs gave in Stanford about the connecting the dots. And as I'm looking back and connecting my dots, I actually must say that I can't remove any episode of my life that I would like to change anything where I'm at today. So I think that everything that's happening is happening for a reason. There were a lot of bumps, but every bump when I'm looking back really connected the dots to make me where I'm at today. And I'm just comfortable with it.
I love that, Ivan. And for our community, what a wonderful insight. And winning is always nice and it's great, but it's a challenging times. That's what forms who you become, who you are, what you're going to be. And Ivan, I just love how you said, I am where I am today. And I'm grateful for that. From all the things that happened, I wouldn't change anything. And I think that answer is terrific. Ivan, it's been a pleasure to hear your insights. Congratulations on your exit. Congratulations on what you're doing today in the few different areas. And I really appreciate your strategies and your insights that you've shared with our community of how to have a better business. And as we wrap up the interview, if someone would like to get in touch with you, and I'll put this in the show notes so you don't have to worry about writing it down for our listeners, what's the best way that somebody can find you online?
If you want to find out more about the roll-ups and the consolidation strategy and how to build a consolidation, we're at vetintegrations.com. You also can find a lot of information about the burnout and how we combat burnout using the business methodologies. And if you can spell my last name, then you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Ivan Zakharenkov.
Terrific. And quite the challenge for us to say, but again, thank goodness for show notes on that. I will have links for everything to make it super easy for everyone. And Ivan, as we wrap this up, again, thank you so much and please stay healthy and safe.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
This podcast is brought to you by the Deep Wealth Experience. Your liquidity event is the largest and most important financial transaction of your life. Most business owners leave anywhere from 50% to over 100% of their deal value in the buyer's pocket and don't even know it. I should know. I said no to a 7-figure offer and yes to mastering the art and science of a liquidity event. 2 years later, I said yes to a different buyer with a 9-figure offer. Are you thinking about an exit or liquidity event? If you believe that you either don't have the time or you'll prepare closer to your liquidity event, think again. Don't become a statistic and make the fatal mistake of believing that the skills that built your business are the same ones for your liquidity event. After all, how can you master something you've never done before? Let the 90-day Deep Wealth Experience and our 9-step roadmap of preparation help you capture the maximum value for your liquidity event. Let's listen to what a few graduates of the Deep Wealth Experience have to say.
This course is one of the best investments you will ever make because you will get an ROI of 100 times that. Anybody who doesn't go through it will lose millions.
If you don't have time for this program, you'll never have time for a successful liquidity.
I mean, it was the best value of any business course I've ever taken. The money was very well spent.
Compared to when we first began, today I feel better prepared, but in some respects, maybe less prepared, not because of the course, but because the course brought to light so many things that I thought we were on top of that we need to fix.
I 100% believe there's never a great time for a business owner to allocate extra hours into his or her week or day. So it's an investment that will yield results today. Before I took the program, I thought I will reap the benefit of this program in 3 to 5 years down the road. But as soon as I stepped forward into the program, my mind changed immediately.
there was so much value in the experience that the time that I invested paid back so much for the energy that was expended.
The Deep Wealth experience compared to other programs is the top. What we learn is very practical. Sometimes you learn stuff that it's great to learn, but you never use it. The stuff we learn from Deep Wealth experience, I believe it's going to benefit us both.
I've done an executive MBA. I've worked for billion-dollar companies before. I've worked for smaller companies before I started my business. I've been running my business successfully now for getting close to a decade. We're on a growth trajectory. Reflecting back on the Deep Wealth, I knew pretty much less than 10% what I know now, maybe close to 1% even.
Hands down the best program in which I've ever participated. And we've done a lot of different things over the years. We've been in other mastermind groups, gone to many seminars, workshops, conferences, retreats, read books. This was so different. I just really haven't had an experience that's anything close to this in all the years that we've been at this. It's 5-star, A+.
I would highly recommend it to any super busy business owner out there.
The Deep Wealth experience was definitely a game changer for me.
And Deep Wealth is an accurate name for it. This program leads to deeper wealth. And happier wealth, not just deeper wealth. I don't think there's a dollar value that could be associated with such an experience and knowledge that could be applied today and forever.
Are you leaving millions on the table? Please visit www.deepwealth.com/success to learn more. If you're not on my email list, you'll want to be. Sign up at www.deepwealth.com/podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode of the Sell My Business podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Reviews help me reach new listeners, grow the show, and continue to create content that you'll enjoy. As we close out this episode, a heartfelt thank you for your time, and as always, please stay healthy and safe.